What's up, guys? Cato DeZora here. Welcome to my channel. And today is August 5th, 2025. And I wanted to talk to you guys today about my group, Occult Finance Group. I know that name is already kind of weird. It should be a little edgy and provocative. And it is definitely a group that's very unconventional. I wanted to share with you guys a little bit about it because ever since I launched that group last month, I got a bunch of members. I've been putting a lot of work into it, sharing a ton of info. And for the most part, you guys have been really captivated, those of you guys that are in the group. It's been really interesting and really mind-blowing stuff. But for those of you guys who are not in the group and who may have seen me talking about it on my social media platforms or getting my emails and whatnot, I know that the idea of a cult finance group is a little bit weird, and I wanted to kind of explain it. The whole point of a cult finance group is to put together my tremendous amount of knowledge with occult and conspiratorial research that I've done over the course of the last 5 years, and even more beyond that. But in the last 5 years, I took it really seriously. And I've been doing conspiracy research virtually every single day for several hours a day during that time. So I have a lot of knowledge about that. And I wanted to put that together with financial world knowledge from the mainstream financial world in order to come up with investment strategies. What we have is two completely different worlds here, and these worlds are colliding in a cult finance group. That is the whole purpose of creating this group. Now, these two worlds normally never go together, and there's very good reasons for that. So on the one hand, let's talk about that conspiratorial group, because that's how most of you guys know me, as a conspiracy researcher. Now, back in 2020, I began a very dedicated and devoted research journey. I've put a tremendous amount of effort into it. I've put thousands of hours into it over the last 5 years, thousands of dollars in my website and into hundreds of books and all kinds of stuff to build out this whole library, which I'm continuing to build, of all the counter-narrative and conspiratorial and suppressed knowledge and suppressed history I could possibly find. And I read several hours a day this stuff. I'm very, very determined to try to understand it all. And I'm still not even close to understanding it all, but I've definitely gained an enormous amount of knowledge. What I have learned is that there is unquestionably a kind of cult that is basically at the highest echelons of our society, and they're pulling the strings of a lot of the things that happen in our world. That includes major things like the pandemic of 2020, or all the riots and protests that took place globally, wars, revolutions, major social events, major social movements, cultural movements, all these kinds of things. They are not organic, not even a little bit. Okay, all that kind of stuff is engineered by a conspiratorial elite at the top, and they view us essentially as livestock. We are to them a herd of livestock, and we exist to be milked and to be herded and to be manipulated, and for them to harvest not just our wealth and property, but mostly our energy. Our energy, the energy that we create as human beings with our creativity and our productivity and our ideas and our hard work and everything that we put our emotional and our physical and our mental and our spiritual energy into, they harvest that. And the number one way they do that is through the financial system. It is very important to understand that. They do it in other ways too, but by far and away, the most effective way that they have to harvest energy and to also control us like a herd of human beings, almost like an advanced form of livestock, which is really in many ways what we are. The most effective way that they do that is the financial system, okay? All our money, our entire money, and the US dollar is at the top of the heap of all the world's money. All our money is basically a form of mass control and energy harvesting, and it is created and manipulated and managed by a conspiratorial elite that's very evil. They're basically a satanic cult, although they're at that level, you're going to find a bunch of Jews, a bunch of Freemasons, and really mostly it's kind of a Judeo-Masonic, evil, malevolent type of spirituality that they have. Now, they're very secretive about all this, of course, so I can't give you authoritative information on all that, and nobody can. There are occasionally whistleblowers and stuff that come out and try to give information about that, and either nobody believes what they're saying or they get killed. So that's almost always what happens. But there is such an enormous amount of research about this group of people going back thousands of years. That's the most important thing that you guys have to know. This is not new, not by any means. If you study the New World Order conspiracy or, the things peripheral to that, it's going to feel like this stuff maybe goes back a few decades, maybe a few centuries, It goes back way deeper than that, you guys. It goes deep into history because this cult has been evolving and adapting and changing and parasiting off of different communities and different civilizations and changing how they operate and just sort of evolving with the times. They're always ahead. They're always more malevolent. They're always more crafty and more conniving and more manipulative than any host civilization that they live among. And as a result of all that development, they have become highly, highly advanced in our time, particularly with finance, like I said, and technology. Technology is the main thing that they're probably funneling most of their effort towards, but they are funneling most of that effort and energy as a result of the wealth that they've harvested over the last couple centuries through the money system. So once you understand that that cult exists and they are malevolent and they believe human beings exist to be milked and to have their energy and their wealth and their vitality harvested from them, and they see us as livestock, once you wrap your head around that and you realize that this evil cult really does exist and they're immensely powerful, then you have to start figuring out how they do what they do. What is the means of their operations? And as I mentioned, they have a bunch of ways of doing it, but by far the most effective is the financial system. There's a number of reasons for that. So first of all, the fact that human beings covet money so much. We love money. Let's just face it. Human beings love money. It doesn't matter if you're American or Japanese or European, or if you're living in modern times, or if you're living a few centuries ago or a few millennia ago. What we all have in common is that we want money. We covet money. Why? Because money is a proxy for human energy. Okay. When we say we covet money, we don't just want a stack of green paper in our hand, or thousands of years ago, a stack of silver coins or gold coins in our hand. That doesn't do much for us. What money really is a way to transfer energy from one person to another. So if I have a $100 bill and it's just in my wallet doing nothing, it doesn't change anything for me. It doesn't improve my life. It doesn't do anything for me until I decide to pull that $100 bill out and go and pay someone to do something for me or to sell me something that I want. Now, in any exchange, that person is going to want the money more than whatever it is that they're giving me. So as soon as I do that, I have the power. By whipping out that money, I have the power to determine what they give me in exchange or what they do for me in exchange, assuming that they want to make that trade with me. Once I transfer that money, I get back what I want, whether that's some kind of work task or whether that's an item that I want to buy. That energy has been transferred to the next person. And now it goes back. It went from being kinetic energy. Now it goes back to being potential energy that that person holds. And now they are holding that energy and they can go forward in the world and decide when and where to spend that money and transfer that energy yet again. When they transfer that bill to someone else, that person is going to transfer energy back to them, and so on and on it goes. Now, what is the source of all this energy? This is pretty much the most important thing to know that so few people understand. The source of this is basically money being created out of nothing. And in our system, that entity that creates that money is the banking system. Most people don't know this. A lot of people think that money is created by the government. That is not true, not in our system. In our system, the Western system, and it's mostly the global system today, money is created by banks. Even the government has to go to a bank and borrow money in order to get money created for them. So the entity that creates, that is the source of this energy, is banks. The nation, the entire country, has a central bank, and then beyond that is all the member banks that we deal with, whether that be Chase or JP Morgan or Bank of America or Wells Fargo and so on. And the way money gets created, that central bank is the source of all money, and then they loan money to banks, and then banks create more money by lending out a multiple of that money. So the entire banking system is responsible for creating money. Money is born when people borrow it. In other words, all money is debt. So it's very important to understand that all money comes into existence when it's borrowed. And when a loan is made, the person who borrows that money is beholden to the person who lent that money, and that's always banks. So therefore, banks are always in the superior position. They're always in the driver's seat. And who do you think came up with this magnificent system that we have? Bankers, of course. Now, like I said, it goes back thousands of years. You're even going to find this in the Bible, discussed at length, actually. The money changers, the infamous story of the money changers in the Bible, are basically the bankers of that time. When you go trace the development of those people up to modern day, they are the bankers. So those people, the bankers or the money changers, the people in charge of finance, the people who use their control of finance, either their hoarding of money or their ability to create money, and then use that to control the operations of the rest of civilization. They are basically at the top of the food chain of this world conspiracy, okay? So when you look at the financial system, you of course have no awareness of the conspiratorial system that's on this side. And a lot of people, it's quite incredible. A lot of people who are in the financial system, whether they be bankers or maybe loan officers or even executives at big corporations and whatever, a lot of people don't realize that banks create money. Almost everybody is under the impression that governments create money, and they do not. It is banks that create money. They actually create it out of nothing. So they're the source of all that energy. Now, most people don't understand that, but the few who do, a lot of times they start digging into it because that's kind of a mind-blowing realization, and they start going and trying to figure out who these people are, and you're going to find out very quickly that almost all of them are Jews. And you're also going to find out that throughout all of history, the people in charge of money, the money masters, so to speak, of history have almost always been Jews. So the history of Jews and the history of banking are inextricably linked. And in particular, what you're going to see is the way that that group of people uses money to control other people. They use it as a means of control. That is something that is centuries, if not millennia old. So they have more experience with using money to control the operations and behaviors and mannerisms and cultures and the rises and falls of all kinds of civilizations, large and small, throughout history. Behind every war, behind every revolution, behind every cultural movement, more often than not, there's Jewish bankers and Jewish agent provocateurs behind the scenes. That is a very, very common thread throughout history. Not 100% Jews, but very high percentage, okay? Now, when you look at the way the modern day financial system works, so when we look around at things like the stock market today, or we look at various types of economic trends, whether that be money supply, or whether that be aggregate debt, or whether that be student loan debt or mortgage debt, any of these economic factors that we're looking at in mass, when you look behind the scenes, you're going to see a bunch of numbers, a bunch of charts, a bunch of formulas, and that's just kind of how the financial system works. And we all assume that that money has value. In reality, when you learn about the source of money, you find out that money is created by a few taps on the keyboard, and boom, it comes into existence just like that as soon as it's borrowed. So when you understand that, you start to realize, wait a minute, if money is basically infinitely available because it is created out of nothing, and it's actually, in a way, it's created out of less than nothing, right? Because it's debt. So whenever a loan is made, there's someone borrowing that money. So therefore, there's a negative amount on someone's ledger, and they have to pay that back with interest. So the negative amount is always higher than the amount that was created. That's why, in reality, all money has negative value. It has more negative value than positive value. It's a very bizarre inversion. And the more you study this, the more you realize virtually everything good in the world has been inverted by this Judeo-Masonic cult that runs everything. They take everything good, everything natural, everything positive about the world, and they flip it upside down. And that works to their advantage. So when you start to understand that, it starts to become really weird. And a lot of people, they start to go deeper and deeper and study the history of banking and the way that money has been used to manufacture wars and the way that money is always a factor in all these bad things for society and so on and so forth. And you start to realize that the history of finance, especially banking, and the history of conspiracy and all these various evil operations that have been done against humanity for hundreds, if not thousands of years, they're inextricably linked. Okay? These two worlds are inextricably linked. The conspiracy world and the financial world. They work together, and they always have. So when you're looking at the way the financial world operates today and you're trying to understand that, you're watching CNBC or you're reading the Wall Street Journal or you're trying to make some sense of your stock portfolio holdings and so on. If you don't also understand this side, the conspiratorial side, you're always going to be at a disadvantage because, like I said, they're inextricably linked. So I want to share with you an example from the news very recently that will give you a perfect idea of what occult finance is all about and how it works. Because when you go deeper into all this stuff, you're going to find out there's basically always a hidden side to everything. where there's billionaires or successful business deals or a bunch of money being made, we're always told, oh, these people, they're so smart, they're so creative, they're so forward thinking and things like that. And we heap praise on these people who make billions of dollars. On the backside, behind the curtain, there's almost always shady dealings, there's mafia type extortion, bribery, blackmail, there's intelligence agencies maneuvering their way through all of this, there's corporate espionage, there's a lot of theft of corporate property and intellectual property, sabotage is a huge thing. All that kind of stuff goes on behind the scenes. So on the surface, we see these great business deals and we see these, the so-called geniuses making a ton of money. What we don't see is the mafia-like operations that take place behind the scenes. So we think, oh, we put these people on a pedestal. They're so smart. The Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and stuff like that. Oh, these people are so smart. They're so brilliant. They're like geniuses and they just make billions of dollars. They deserve to be worshipped because they're so good at making money. And we all want money, but we're not good at making money. But they're so good at making money. We should put them on a pedestal and worship them. What so many people miss, virtually everyone, especially in the financial world, is the fact that almost always these people are part of a cult, and that cult works like a mafia. So they aren't so good at predicting things because they're so smart and have so much foresight. They're so good at predicting things because they know what's going to happen because that cult is making these things happen. In particular, whenever there's a disaster or a pandemic or a war or a crisis or a terrorist attack or whatever, they can always be first on the scene and they're going to look like they're psychic or look like they're so intelligent they can just see further than everyone else, when in reality, they have privileged information. The way that Congress is, they have these outsized performance in their stock portfolios. And, no one really believes that people in Congress who have 30, 40, 50% increases in their stock portfolios in a year are geniuses. We understand that they're just insider trading and they get away with it because they're powerful. But for some reason, people think automatically Congress people aren't that bright and they're just kind of breaking the system. But billionaires, they're such geniuses, they're so smart. I don't understand why so many people fail to realize this is all the same class of people. They're all elites, they're all conspiratorial, they all work together to feather each other's nests and put money in each other's pockets. And they operate basically like an international crime ring, which is what they are. So this example I want to share with you guys is going to tie all of these things together. So just last week at the very end of July, what was a really big news story is Trump inking a deal with the EU. Okay, the EU is a 27-nation bloc that collectively the United States trades with more than anyone else. Now, as far as individual nations, we do more trade with Canada and Mexico. Those are our biggest trading partners, and China is up there too. I believe China is right behind Mexico. But as a bloc, the EU is the largest trading partner because the EU, they are individual nations, but they also get together and work as a nation. They use a single currency, which is the euro. Most of them are in NATO, which is a kind of defense-related alliance. So they work together as a bloc for the most part. So when Trump made a deal with the EU, it was a very big deal. What Trump has been doing in order to achieve his tariff-related world order, essentially, which is basically he's using tariffs as an all-in-one diplomatic and political and economic tool. The way he's been doing that is basically by making huge threats of tariffs to these other parties, friend and foe alike. He's not making a distinction between countries that are considered to be our allies and countries that are considered to be our enemies. He's basically saying everybody who wants to trade with the United States, everybody who wants access to this huge population that we have inside our borders with their tremendous amount of dollars that they want to spend and go into debt to spend, that they just want to spend. All the countries that want to access those people and sell your exports to us, you now have to pay a price to get in the door. And the price is going to be different for everybody, but they're all going to be high. That's basically what the Trump tariff order has been about ever since Trump took office earlier this year. What he's done is he's slapped tariffs on basically everybody, and they are just willy-nilly. They're all over the place. He hasn't really given a kind of rhyme or reason to the amounts that he's choosing. In some cases, he's been very punitive to certain countries that typically have a very good relationship with the United States. Canada and Switzerland are two prime examples. For some reason, he's been a total bully to Canada and to Switzerland, even though in the past we have very good relationships with these countries. So it is a bit of a mystery why he's choosing to be so aggressive and so heavy-handed with some countries. But for the most part, the pattern appears to be he hits them really hard with some crazy tariff, And this is kind of how he negotiates everything. He does it in court, he does it in business deals. He's been doing this for a very long time. It's just his style. But he hits people with a horrible offer that's going to be humiliating for them and shameful for them, and there's no possible way they can accept it. And then he basically says, okay, well, that's the way it's going to be unless you want to negotiate something better. Do you want to negotiate something better? Okay, then meet me. Come to my conference room on my terms, and we can talk about a better deal, and maybe I'll do something better. When these nations, when the leaders of these nations, or even any organization, when they capitulate to Trump in that manner, then Trump backs off and gives them a better deal, but it's still a bad deal. That's important to understand. Trump's giving bad deals to everybody, like I said, friend and foe alike. But the tactic has been to give them an insanely bad deal and then negotiate back to just kind of a bad deal. That's exactly what he did with the EU. So the EU walked away with 15% tariffs in this new deal. Now, something important to realize, and a lot of people forgot this, is that in the very beginning of when Trump started talking about tariffs, the EU collectively kind of assumed that the worst case scenario would be 15%. Then when they got hit with 35%, 40, 50%, 25% on automobiles, all these super high tariffs, when they finally settled at 15%, they were happy, even though their old worst case scenario now became their best case scenario. They still accepted it. There were some caveats to this deal, and they're very, very important. One of them is going to be especially important. So basically, the EU has to buy a bunch of stuff from the United States, and they have to invest a bunch of money in the United States. The most significant purchase that they have to make is $750 billion in energy, okay? They have to buy American energy products. Now, let's pause this story right there. When we know the EU has signed a deal to buy 750 billion with a B in energy products over the next 3 years. Pause that and let's go back to 2022 when a major story hit the news. If you've been following me since then, you know as soon as this story hit the news, I told you guys it's total bullshit. You guys will remember it even if you weren't following me back then. And that was the explosion that took place in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is a Russian natural gas pipeline that goes from Russia to the northern part of Europe and basically supplies Europe with a tremendous amount of their energy in that way. When that pipeline exploded, it wasn't called sabotage immediately, but I called it sabotage immediately. This was already during the very early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war. This is already when I understood a lot about how the United States does business. And the fact that that pipeline just suddenly blew up out of nowhere, to me, was obviously an operation of sabotage. And I immediately started trying to figure out who did it. Meanwhile, the press was saying it might have been an accident, blah, blah, blah. We don't know who did it, yada, yada, all this ridiculous stuff, because for the most part, the news is just designed to confuse you and obfuscate things. Now, they were doing that for a while, and then they fairly quickly started into a narrative saying that Russia blew up their own pipeline. That is obviously absurd, because why would Russia blow up their own pipeline that they spent billions of dollars building when they could just turn it off? If they wanted to cut off energy from Europe, which they're making a ton of money from, so why would they want to turn it off in the first place? But if they did want to do that, all they'd have to do is cut off the flow and then tell Europe, hey, we want to negotiate, and then we'll maybe turn it back on. Why would they blow up a pipeline that makes them a shitload of money? It's so obvious that if anybody, it wouldn't be the Russians, okay? This is a literal pipeline of money for Russia, and Russia needed that money because they were just getting started in the Ukraine war. So you think of it as a pipeline of energy going out, but for Russia, it's a pipeline of money going in. So why would they cut that off? It obviously wasn't Russia, even though there was a bunch of news trying to say Russia, Russia, Russia. I even remember this ridiculous news article that came out, and it had a whole infographic with these illustrations and everything. And it was by, I believe it was by The Guardian, which is a UK-based news organization. And they had this whole elaborate scheme about how Russian special operations probably did it. And it had pictures of Russian divers in a boat, and it said they probably came in at night and blah, blah, blah. It's so outrageous. I literally laughed, and I did post it to my followers, who I had way fewer followers at that time. But I told you guys, this is such obvious bullshit. It's totally laughable, and it's stupid, and nobody should listen to this. Now, when you're trying to figure out who committed a crime, what detectives will often do is they have certain formulas, and one of the formulas that they use, which has been around a very long time, is they look for who has the means, the motive, and the opportunity, okay? because if they have those three things, they equal a suspect. If they are missing one of those things, they're very unlikely to be a suspect. So who had the means and the motive and the opportunity? Well, the United States certainly had the means. We have the most sophisticated military in the world. We have a tremendous national security infrastructure with all kinds of special operations and intelligence services and very strong relationships with many different departments and militaries in the world, especially in Europe. So if any country had the means to pull something like that off, it would be the United States. Motive, why would we have a motive to sabotage that? Well, our so-called ally, Ukraine, that we were pumping a ton of money into to get them started on their war with Russia, at that point we weren't engaged in direct conflict with Russia, of course, but we were engaged in some kind of conflict, essentially what would be called a proxy war, okay? We're using Ukraine to fight the Russians, but we're funding it, we're sending them weaponry, we're essentially, their boss, and we're sicking Ukraine on them so they can go die, and Americans can just write the checks. That is definitely what is known as a proxy war. So because Russia is our enemy in this proxy war, we certainly have a motive. But the motive really ran quite a bit deeper. At that time, America had, over the course of the last couple of decades, become a net energy exporter. America has really built up its infrastructure for exports of natural fuels, of fossil fuels. Among them, oil is number one, but right behind that, natural gas. Now, in the last few years, the United States has discovered tremendous deposits of natural gas. However, our infrastructure, our own American energy-based infrastructure, is mostly based on oil. To a significant degree, it's based on coal. We haven't really adopted nuclear power that much. For the most part, we run on energy that is in the form of oil and coal. But we have a lot of natural gas. We have way more natural gas than we can use in this country, like tens of millions of cubic feet of natural gas, and they keep finding new deposits also. So what do we have to do with all that natural gas that we can't use? We have to export it. Now, the way that America exports its natural gas is not by pipeline, it's by ship. The biggest collective user of natural gas in the world is Europe. Europe had been a customer of Russia's natural gas for decades. They basically run on Russian natural gas. Russian oil also, and they do get oil from other places as well, but the major energy source for Europe has been Russian natural gas for a long time. And Europeans, they really need energy, especially in the winter, because with winter comes sub-zero temperatures in a lot of Northern Europe, and it can be very, very dangerous for them. So they need to heat their homes in order to just survive winter. And the way they heat it is with natural gas, which mostly comes from Russia. So you have the Ukraine and Russia war. You have most of NATO, basically all of NATO, having the back of Ukraine. While they weren't 100% in on Ukraine, and Ukraine wanted to join NATO, but most of NATO was kind of sketchy about that because it's way too close to Russia, and that would inevitably create conflict. The United States was like, no, we're Ukraine all the way. Ukraine has to win because Russia's our enemy, and Putin's a dictator, and he wants to take over all of Europe. So we just started writing checks, billions and billions and billions. And a tremendous amount of pressure came from the United States government to the European governments to get them on board with supporting Ukraine. And like I said, they were iffy about it. There was a lot of hesitation at that time, but they were kind of like, okay, well, America is so powerful and so rich, and they kind of tell us what to do a lot of the time. So I guess we'll sort of go along with it, but we'll ease our way into it, right? Then all of a sudden, this pipeline blows up. All of a sudden, Europe is in a desperate need for natural gas, and they're in a bind. And who do you think came to the rescue at that point with an abundant amount of natural gas to sell to Europe at much higher prices, I might add, which would be very beneficial for the supplier? Of course, it was the United States. So all these things just happened to come together at just the right time, where you have America having an abundant natural gas, but not really a market for it. You have a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is heating up and threatens to possibly drag in more nations from Europe. And then you have those nations of Europe, which are very heavily dependent on Russian natural gas. And where they're getting that natural gas is a long-time supplier, very, very cheap, very abundant. However, they are paying Russia for that gas, and then that money is inevitably going to turn around and support their war effort against Ukraine. The United States says, we don't like this at all. We have to sabotage this arrangement, and we can win. If we sabotage the arrangement by blowing up this pipeline, Russia loses their source of all this money that they're getting from Europe. Europe has to find a new supplier, so they're not going to give their money to Russia anymore. And guess what? We can now sell them all of our natural gas, which we have a ton of, at much higher prices. But guess what? They need to buy it because they have this huge shortfall because the pipeline is destroyed and there's no way they can get another pipeline online that fast. We can come in and look like the rescuers, except they're actually going to be paying much higher prices for our natural gas. That is not proven. There's no one going to say that's what happened. This is only a theory. But to me, it's obvious that that's what happened. And a big part of why I think that is because I have studied the history of American business tremendously. And when you do that, you will find that the American business empire has always been partnered with the US military and US intelligence services. I shouldn't say always, but definitely since about the early 1900s and late 1800s, that is how it has worked. There is a kind of a secret partnership between the US national security infrastructure and its business infrastructure. They work together. They work hand in glove. There's many examples of this. Where US corporate business interests are concerned, the US military will go in and infiltrate. And US intelligence services usually will do this even more than military. When the military comes, it's usually because they really need to show a force. But normally, intelligence services, whether that's the US CIA or the Mossad, which basically is kind of integrated with the CIA at this point, they will infiltrate or subvert or sabotage or do espionage or do blackmail or bribery or, in this case, sabotage a pipeline in order to create the circumstances for American corporations to get very, very wealthy and very, very powerful. That helps the US government with obvious things like tax revenues and things like that. But in reality, it helps a tiny upper crust of people because basically at that level, it's all the same people. The same people cycle in and out of business and in and out of government at that top level. So a lot of the directors, a lot of the senators, a lot of the presidents and stuff, they either go to school with the same people who run Wall Street and major corporations, or they are those people. Very often, there are people who are at the top level of government as appointees, as political appointees, but their background is as a Wall Street banker or as a Fortune 500 CEO and so on. So it's really one little gang at the top, and they benefit tremendously by using the power of the US military and its, especially in its secret operations, its special forces and its intelligence services, things like that, by using those to create the circumstances for their businesses to get filthy rich. And it's not for all Americans. It's only for the chosen, big, powerful corporations who can keep a secret. It's very important. So when you read the Wall Street Journal or you watch CNBC or you are trying to check out, the daily stock prices and stuff like that, you're not going to see stories overtly saying that American businesses run like a mafia and they work hand in glove with assassins and spies and special operations groups around the world in order to sabotage their competition and get filthy rich. You're not going to read that. Obviously, they're not going to admit to that kind of stuff. However, that is the history of American business, especially in the 20th century, and it really surged forward after World War II. Whether you want to believe it or not, the United States and the so-called allies were basically more of the bad guys than the good guys. At best, there were bad guys on both sides, and they were just fighting over control about which group of bad guys was going to take over the world from that point on. But the United States was already very corrupt as a country at that time, and its allies were even more corrupt. The British Empire and the Soviet Union were way worse than the United States, but the United States was no angel either. Already going into that, there's a lot of early 1900s history where the United States government and its, sort of client corporations were working together to create all kinds of revolutions and coups and sabotage other countries and infiltrate their governments and all kinds of crazy stuff. A lot of people have died and suffered as a result of the US's meddling in order to serve its client corporations. As the 20th century dragged on, that would be exported to the Middle East. So there's a lot of suffering in the Middle East, of course, all over Africa and Asia, all over the world. This same business mindset has been basically infecting the entire economy of the whole world because it works so well that these people just do it more and more and more. So the shocking thing at this point is that so few people understand this stuff. But when you've been studying conspiracy for a long time, like I have, it starts to become very natural to you to understand this stuff. So way back at that time, and I have a number of screenshots to prove it, and I have reposted these things recently. At that time, I said it's by far and away the most likely that the United States did it, and they probably did it to support their client corporations that are going to do this thing. And also, of course, as always, to support their national defense infrastructure. The corporations, the so-called defense corporations of the United States, always make tremendous amounts of money whenever there's war. They make money all the time because they're always cranking out weapons, but the United States is the world's largest exporter of weaponry. We do pick and choose to some degree who we sell these weapons to, but really we always want to sell weapons. And in many cases, when the United States wants to sell weapons to a country where it kind of can't sell weapons to this country because it's for some reason sort of, going to be a political issue, what they will do is they'll negotiate with another country that it does have a good relationship with and get that country to sell its weapons to that other country. And the United States will sell its newest, latest, greatest weapons to that country that it has good relationships with. And the only thing shocking about this is that so few people understand it. Like I said, once you start peeling back the layers and understanding how it all works, it becomes very obvious. The way the United States operates for the most part is basically on mafia tactics. We've got a great mythology around us. We've got all kinds of patriotic stuff and all kinds of things saying that we're a free country and we're a democracy and we stand for the greatest values and we stand for morality and freedom and justice and democracy all over the world. And all this ridiculous propaganda that makes people think that the United States is basically the world's good guys. There's a lot of other bad guys too, but at the top of the heap, the pinnacle of the worst, most corrupt business and government operations in the world is, for many decades now, has been the United States. It hasn't always been the United States, but in recent decades, it's definitely the United States. So when you understand the way all this stuff operates, and when you realize it has a sort of front, like ahead of the curtain on the stage, a big show that it puts on where you have these brilliant people and the greatest minds and all these great schools, and these people, we're just constantly cranking out billionaires because they're so smart and so hardworking and we're so innovative. And that's what we show to the world. And behind the scenes, there's a ton of sabotage and espionage and blackmail and stealing and corporate espionage and all kinds of intelligence operations going on behind the scenes. And it just goes on and on and on. There's a tremendous amount of that behind the scenes. You will understand more and more that business is essentially a front operation. Not all business, but definitely big business. A lot of tech companies, energy companies, defense companies. These are some of the companies that are notorious for working hand in glove with the US government and its kind of, intelligence or special operations forces in order to create the circumstances for them to get filthy rich. And of course, to make their stockholders filthy rich, because when these companies are very profitable, and they report these tremendous surges in earnings or profitability or whatever, all of these positive things that they say, and then shareholders catch wind of that, the shareholder value goes up, and therefore the price of those stocks goes up, and everybody who holds a large amount of those stocks gets really, really wealthy really fast. That's why you're seeing so many people become billionaires in just the last few years. It's all through the stock market, which is basically a giant money laundering scheme. And anybody who holds these stocks, they become filthy rich overnight without really paying any attention to all the machinations that go on behind the scenes. Because really, they don't care that much. If they're making money, they don't really want to know how it's made. They just want to make it. Because if you start learning how it's made, you're probably going to at some point have a moral dilemma, and you're not going to like hearing it very much, or you'll just be in denial. From occult finance, from the occult finance perspective, we are going into the market, we are going into it with the mindset that this is how it works. We're just accepting the fact that American business, and to a large extent the world's business, right? Israel is probably worse than the United States in most ways, the way that they run their international business, because it's all corrupt. But the United States is the biggest by far. And we do so much business in this corrupt and shady manner. And our money system itself is nothing but debt, and it's very exploitative. It creates extreme wealth inequality where a tiny group of people is getting richer than anyone else and at a faster rate than anybody else. And that part is just like surging into the stratosphere while everybody else falls behind, because inflation is just sort of destroying the dollar and people are making more money but actually having less wealth. All this stuff is going on all at the same time because of the United States system and how it's designed to work. It is designed to work this way. It is not failing. It is functioning as intended. It's just that we, the normal people of the world, don't understand the true intentions. In Occult Finance Group, we do understand the intentions. This is what I teach to you guys. This is the information I share on a daily basis. I don't just explain it to you conceptually, but I provide real world examples every single day of how you can see that the US economy and government and its corporations basically operate like an international mafia. It's very obvious. And the more you understand about the way mafia works, the more you will understand about the way the US government works, especially under Trump, because there's never been a president who operates more like a true New York crime boss than Trump. He is overtly like a mafia boss. It is very obvious. People want to believe that he's this heroic figure saving the country, but when you understand how mafia bosses work and how mafias work in general, organized crime rings, and how much they have in common with intelligence agencies, and for most of the second half of the 20th century, intelligence agencies and mafias were literally working together and to a large extent were the same thing. So when you understand that, and you see someone like Trump come in and make all these mafia type deals with corporations, with people in government, with regulators, with investors, with Wall Street, with BlackRock, with all these kinds of entities, you realize it's nothing more than a mafia. It is actually quite simple. It's just hard to wrap your head around the fact that our world is controlled by a mafia. But once you accept that and you really learn how mafias work, and you understand that behind the scenes, there's always intimidation or threats or violence or coercion. And there's like a carrot and stick type of thing where if you do what they want you to do and you enable them, you get richly rewarded with power or with wealth or with privilege or whatever. If you don't do what they want you to do, or if you don't enable their operations, you will suffer. You will suffer, or your loved ones will suffer. At best, you might have consequences for yourself, like losing a job or losing a privileged position. At worst, someone in your family will die. And very recently, one of the only representatives in Congress that actually sort of exposes this stuff, who's Representative Thomas Massey, he was coming out saying that basically organized Jews run the entire US government and they have handlers that control all Congress people. He said that in an interview, and the very next week, his wife suddenly died. His wife, who was in good health and she was only in her 40s, all of a sudden she died of a heart attack completely out of the blue. That's the kind of thing that a mafia does. Now, people can't wrap their head around the fact that this is just a mafia hit, but it's pretty obvious because that type of thing happens all the time. So if you understand that the United States is run by a mafia, and the way that the mafia works to make money is the same way that street level mafias in New York or New Jersey work. They have front operations. They run businesses that look like legit businesses and either launder money or take in money and use it for illicit purposes. And they're just basically a way for that criminal, illicit organization to look legit. That's the same way the entire US corporate and government structure works. It's just on a much grander scale. They make mafias like in The Sopranos or in The Godfather look like junior high school kids. That's how sophisticated the Judeo-Masonic mafia that runs the United States actually is. And when you understand that, then you'll want to see what those front organizations are, what those front businesses are, because if you're smart, you will invest in them to make money, and then you will take that money, if you have principles and values like I do, you will take that money and reinvest it in a way to get out of the system. That is my goal. I do not want to make money off of evil and corruption and mafia style tactics. It makes me sick to my stomach to do that. However, I firmly believe that if you understand the true forces that run the world, it's not algorithms, it's not super smart people with their genius ideas, it's not people who are super lucky or they have a tremendous amount of prescience, or they build really good teams, or they go to the best schools. It might work for a handful of people, but for the most part, the way that corporations and individuals and super powerful political individuals, the way that these people get so much wealth and power is because they work together like a mafia. And the people who get to those levels are people who are agents of the mafia, or they work really well with the mafia, so they are able to get up into those upper ranks. They're being rewarded for serving the mafia. If they ever get in the way of the mafia, they are destroyed, and you very promptly will forget that they ever existed because they basically write them out of history. That's how it really works. When you understand that, You can either fight it, which is basically impossible. I've tried to fight it. I've thought about fighting it. I've written about fighting it. I've been obsessed with fighting it for years. And at some point I realized you can't fight it because number one, it's too powerful. But number two, the more important reason is because people don't want the system to collapse. What most people want is they want the system to stay intact as long as it's making their life better. So most people do not have strong values or strong principles, and they aren't guided by morals or this sort of inner moral compass. Most people just want comfort, and they want security, and they want their life to be easy, and they want to be distracted and entertained and amused. Most people will get all that as long as the mafia is in power, because the mafia wants to keep all those people out of its way. But if anybody tries to get in their way, then those people are in a tremendous amount of danger. And so few people actually want to do anything about this. So few people want to put themselves in harm's way in order to make the world a better place that it may as well be zero. The vast majority of people, they don't mind that a mafia, an ultra corrupt, ultra evil mafia that uses the most diabolical means you can imagine to maintain their grip on power. That's who run things, and most people don't care. They really don't. They might find it amusing, they might find it unbelievable. Some people will believe it, but they'll just go about the same thing that they're doing. They're going to clock into work tomorrow and make their paycheck, and really it's not going to change their life in any way. Once you understand that the reason that mafia, that ultra evil mafia, is able to maintain the power that they do is because the vast majority of people lets them and actually wants them in that position, you'll realize there's no way to dislodge them and no way to change the system. The absolute best you can do if you're a good person is try to harvest wealth and harvest energy off this system like a parasite, which is what they were for thousands of years, and until they got into a position where they're running things. You can parasite off a little bit of wealth when you understand how they operate, and then you can take that wealth and convert it into real assets, things like gold, silver, land, livestock, real estate, maybe real estate in another country. And you can try to help yourself, and you can try to help your family and your loved ones and your inner circle escape the kind of nightmarish hellhole that they're going to turn the world into, because they're definitely trying to turn the world into a kind of totalitarian, technocratic hellscape where a few people run the entire world using mostly technology and then a lot of violence backing it up. If you don't want to live in that kind of world, for sure you won't want to live in the United States, because this is the testing grounds and the R&D lab for that world, and it's happening at a very, very fast pace. If that doesn't appeal to you, then you have to get out of the United States fairly quickly. And if you don't have a bunch of money already, then you need to make money. And you can either figure out how to make it using conventional means, or you can listen to me and join my occult finance group and start investing in these evil people who make money just appear, billions and trillions in dollars of it, and try to harvest a little bit of that wealth for yourself and use it for good purposes rather than enabling them to do all the bad shit that they're going to do anyway. They don't need your help, okay? Your measly little dollars that you invest in the market's not going to make any difference to them because they create money. However, if you understand who they are and how they operate, you can earn a little bit of money for yourself and hopefully get out of what is coming. You can't stop it, but you can get out of the way of what is coming. I've been saying that for a long time. So that is the philosophy behind Occult Finance Group. As I said, I talk about this every day. I share stories every day. I make a one-page report every single day for my members, every day, Monday through Friday when the market's open. And I also provide a bunch of additional resources too. I provide various charts, various visual aids, various explanations. I answer questions. I provide a bunch of little mini articles at random that talk about different topics that I think you guys need to understand. It's a group I'm putting a lot of effort in and sharing a lot of knowledge in, because I really want your lives to get better by having all this knowledge. It is going to challenge you, not just intellectually, but morally. In many cases, it's probably not going to make you feel very good, because understanding the way the world really works is definitely a wake-up call, and it is quite unpleasant. I've gone through many sort of emotionally overwhelming moments over the years where I just felt like the world is too fucked up, and why do I even want to participate in it? And I hope the whole thing just collapses. But you know, that's not going to happen. For the most part, humanity has consented to be ruled by the most evil people imaginable, and consent is the magic word. When most people consent to this, then that's what happens. And people aren't told that they're the most evil people in the world that they're submitting to, but they're just given all these deals that aren't very good deals, but they don't really think about them. They're getting distracted by shiny things, and they're not paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes. And most people are just falling for these tricks of this sort of satanic cult that is constantly deceiving and manipulating people into signing up for their own destruction. For you, you don't have to consent to it, but the majority of people still will, and therefore they are going to drag society into that direction, whether you like it or not. So if you see what's happening, like I said, your only choice is to get out of its way because you can't stop it. There's too many people that are enabling it, and those people are going to continue to enable it, whether you like it or not. So with all that said, I hope that is somewhat captivating to you and interesting to you. And if you don't want to sign up for my group, that's totally fine. But I do hope that this video makes an impression on you to some degree and makes you want to research it on your own. You can learn about it on your own. You can do all the conspiracy research on your own. The vast majority of what I have used is open source stuff like books and various research articles and all types of different documentaries and stuff. I've just been doing this for thousands of hours for many years now, and I've put together thousands of sources, hundreds of books, hundreds of documentaries, thousands of articles and screenshots and all kinds of stuff. I'm really, really into this, but you don't have to trust me and you don't have to buy this from me. You can do it yourself, but I hope that you do it for your own sake. I hope that you do it. Figure it out on your own. Just don't be complacent. Don't keep feeding your energy into the system. Don't keep working for dollars. Don't keep slaving your life away working for dollars that are worth less every single day. And the harder you work, the harder it's going to be to maintain even the same lifestyle that you have now. You are going to experience increasing inflation. You're going to experience increasing corruption in the government. And you are definitely going to experience a lot more control of your life by technology companies and by the federal government. All of that is coming at a very rapid pace. But for long, your money will be worth very little. Your life will be mostly controlled by these very malevolent entities, and there will be no way out. You will basically live in a technocratic, totalitarian society where your money is almost worthless, and you have to sign up for some kind of technological enslavement in order to even just get by. All of this is coming. It's been planned for a very long time. If you don't want to be a part of that, you have to learn all about it so you can work your way out. I am offering what I believe is a good shortcut to all of this. But like I said, you don't have to trust me, but please heed this warning. If you don't get the information from me, get it somewhere, because I really do want to make your lives better. For all you guys who have supported me and followed me over the years and helped me turn this into a productive business and into a fairly large platform and have shared my videos to so many people, I really appreciate you guys, and I genuinely want to make your lives better. So if you don't learn this stuff from me, learn it somewhere, but take it seriously. The world is changing fast, very fast. A lot of you guys, the jobs that you're in now, no matter how cushy they are, no matter how much money you're making, those jobs won't even exist in a few years because things are changing so fast. And they're not changing in ways that are good. They're only changing in ways that are bad. So you need to adapt to this very quickly and understand that the reason things are the way they are is because of this conspiratorial elite at the top of the food chain that operates like a mafia in this conspiratorial realm where they're always committing espionage and blackmail and bribery and extortion and using leverage on people and using sex bribery and blackmail like the Epstein scandal and all that kind of stuff. But then they have this other side that makes them look legitimate, and that is business. And most people think this is legitimate business, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of very illegitimate stuff going on to help those businesses. That's the way things really work. And when you understand that, hopefully it will help you prepare better for what's coming, because those people really are in control of almost everything. And what they're not in control of now, they're trying to get control of very quickly. They're coming for just about everything. All right, guys, I hope that helps you guys out. If you want to join my group, I think you guys will find it captivating. And I'm so confident in that I'm offering the first 15 days for only $1. So you sign up for $1, you're going to get a crash course that I wrote personally, and I keep adding more information to it to make it better. And then you're going to be welcomed into the group for 15 days. And if you don't like it, you can cancel and you get to keep the entire crash course for $1. Like I said, I've been having that offer in place since day one. A bunch of you guys have taken me up on it. Some of you guys did cancel for different reasons that different people had, but most people have stayed in the group, and most of you guys have given me very positive feedback on it. So that offer is going to stand. If you want to join for $1, and then cancel, you're going to keep the crash course no matter what, because that's really good information that I think everybody needs to know. And that is my gift to you guys for having supported me in this journey over the course of the last 5 years and getting me this far. If you find it helpful, I hope you guys will stay in the group and share information with each other, which a lot of you guys have done already. And I really want to turn this group into a big thing where we have a bunch of like-minded people all working really hard to work their way out of the system and sharing advice and tools and tips with each other so we can all reach our goals together and at a faster rate than we could ever do on our own. This is my ultimate hope, is creating a kind of gang where we can all have each other's back and look out for each other and help each other out and really be able to surge forward in our goals rather than trudging toward them very slowly on our own, because we are going to need each other more than ever in the near future.